everybody. Thank you all for connecting in on the latest webinar from ISITC and the CISI. Once again, we'd like to thank our partners at CISI for hosting the webinar and helping us put this together. It's, as always, we're very grateful to the CISI for their professionalism in working with us on these things. For those of you that are new, ISITC Europe is now a CIC, that's a community of interest company. We're incorporated at the end of last year. And what that CIC means is that we're a company, we're regulated at Companies House, and the directors have all the responsibilities of directors, but we don't have any shares. We're actually trustees of the organisation. So in that case, it's virtually our charitable sort of parts of our day-to-day lives. ISITC, in its new guise, has been doing webinars all year, and we are working on a whole load of webinars throughout next year, and along with some short podcasts for students, which will be available to people that are looking to join the financial services industry, and we're aiming to try and give them a little bit of information about that. So there'll be more on that for ISITC members as we go through towards next year. Today's webinar is all about data, and reference data in particular, but data per se in the financial markets. And when I was working in banking many years ago, I was struggling like a lot of people at the time around managing the huge amount of data that we had, the different types of data, all the data that you need to try and settle a transaction and provide a service to investors and to your clients. And it was extremely costly to buy. It was even more costly to manage, expensive and embarrassing. And I guess from our banking viewpoint, we were lucky that we didn't have the sort of regulations we have today. Today, data has got even bigger. There's far more data, huge amounts of data that is compiled on mountain upon mountain. And large banking organizations, as well as the small institutions, have equal problems. That's just a different size of problem of the data. So it doesn't matter whether you're a broker or whether you're a major investment bank, you've still got issues in and around data. So what we want to do today is to, first of all, identify what the problems are with data. We'd like them defined. And then we'd like to move into the sort of, take our hats off and maybe think about solutions, what they might be. And to help us get to that point, we've got two world-class data experts, with Chris Johnson from HSBC, who I think is pretty well renowned in the business for his expertise in and around data. So we're very grateful and very lucky to have him join the panel to give his views. And Benoit from Euroclear, and Euroclear as the major structure organization in the capital markets, clearly have a huge part to play in trying to resolve issues around data for users of Euroclear and to try and make settlement work efficiently. So Benoit is equally expert in the data problems, but maybe coming in from a slightly different neck of the woods. So that should be interesting. The running formula will be that I will ask Chris for some opening remarks, followed by Benoit. We have then a panel discussion around data. And I hope to open this up for questions once we've finished and we've stirred your thoughts in and around data. And please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to put your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can at the end. So once again, thanks for joining, and I'd like now to hand over to Chris to give us his opening remarks around data and reference data in the financial markets. Chris.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak at this event. So my role is in HSBC within our security services division, which is part of our markets and security services. And so my role is product manager for market data. So essentially, where we are using data that we bring in from the marketplace, that means. So any information that comes in from third-party providers and how that's used in our products and services. So data quality is obviously very important, and provenance and quality and all those good things are very much part of my role. And I've been involved in reference data for 20 years, first of all on the sell side, then on the buy side, and more recently in security services. One thing that I really would bring out from security services is the incredible emphasis on data quality, because it's our lifeblood, is to get the operational processes as efficient and as non-duplicative as possible. So obviously there's a huge amount of attention going into into data quality. So where we are, just in terms of sort of brief positioning of this, I'm not convinced that dirty data is really a fair description. There is a lot of work goes on in the investment process to keep high value data, to ensure STP to root out inefficiencies. However, it's a very complicated process. Lots of different parties involved. There's duplication, as in different organizations sharing information that's from different places. So there can be inconsistencies and there can be missing data. And so that could be conceived to be gaps or data quality issues, but actually there can be very good reasons why they are different. So I'm not going to make any kind of excuses for it, but there are good reasons behind this. There's also a lot of work that's been taking place over the last 20 years to improve this, and we'll come on to this during the discussion. But on the SSI, the Alert GC Direct, the Legal Entity Identifier Initiative, the CSDR regulation, ISO 20022, and derivatives as well. There are a lot of initiatives that are definitely driving improvements in this area, but nevertheless, I'll stop there, Gary.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Benoit, can I ask you for your opening remarks?
Sure. So, well, thank you for the invitation, first of all, much appreciated. So to me, when I think about data, I see three things. It's about quality, it's about accessing the data, and of course it's about cost. So this is, to me, the trinity of data. Now, of course, this is not specific to our financial industry. I think one of the dimensions of our financial industry is when you look at from the pre-trade part or the post-trade part, you see the numerous roles in between them and many different players there. So fragmentation is king. And so the question is, how do you ensure quality of data in finance where you have duplication everywhere? I think that's really today, from my perspective, the industry challenge on data.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's interesting. You both mentioned data quality as key to the efficient operations of the market. Now, why is data quality so difficult? Is it a technical problem, or is it a supply chain issue where we have so much of data going through a supply chain, bought and sold? And it's a case of Chinese whispers, that sometimes the data gets changed marginally, and by the time it gets to the other end, it's got a very different look to it. And I'm particularly thinking about the expense that a lot of firms do with data cleansing to try and find what used to be called the golden copy. So why is data quality a problem? Chris?
Well, you can break it down, and the different areas of information about different entities, information about settlement instructions, information about the instrument itself, and corporate actions. There's a lot of different areas at play here, all of which are important to the transaction processing and STP. And if you break those down into the types of reference data that are used within those, legal entity identifier, for example, has come in, and that's doing a fantastic job of improving the identity of entities, but the extent to which that can be mapped in and actually used for the process. I know there's a lot of work's gone on with that, but there's a lot of different systems, a lot of intermediaries, and a lot of messaging that goes through, and changing that is a big expense across many different players in the market. Well, I guess what I'm saying is there's the end-to-end has a lot of different touch points, and I wouldn't say it's information changing as it goes through. What I would say is it's information from the different parties is coming from different places. It's used for many different purposes, and then it meets in the middle in order to match transactions and to settle them. I think for the mainstream instruments, the likelihood is the breaks are very small. It's going to be for new transactions, or for more exotic instruments, that there are more challenges with the data, but by definition, because they're less used. And in terms of the instrument, for example, there may be a lack of consistency. Some companies may use CEDAL, some may use ISINs as their basis, some may use CUSIPs. This is an international business with a lot of different flows, and the different companies have got different ways of structuring issues and issuers and listing levels. There's lots of different reasons and lots of different databases and data sources in here. I think the only way you could guarantee that everything is identical is by having one data supplier that supplies everybody for everything, and that is very different from the organic way in which the investment process has developed. But nevertheless, that's perhaps something we'll come on to during this discussion.
Yeah, we certainly will. I'd like to pick that up a bit later. Benoit, can I have your views on this as well?
Well, I think I totally agree with what Chris mentioned as in terms of expressing what is a challenge to harness data. What I can add is that quality in data, it's indeed a matter of accuracy. And accuracy comes also with the question, can you trust the source of your data? Is it from the source actually? And if it is not from the source, do you know how the data has been created? And also all the different workflows where the data is being used in a given company. I mean, do you know what is happening there? Because then the data you read, the information you get, it is still the same thing. So that's one dimension, is the accuracy. The other one is coverage. I mean, it could be a matter of, do I have all the data attributes I need? But it's also a matter of, for my portfolio, I mean, do I have the securities coverage I want to get? So how do we ensure coverage is another challenge in the quality. And finally, I guess timeliness. How fresh is your data? Even in reference data, we don't necessarily need to have streaming data or real-time data necessarily, but still timeliness is important. And I'm sure that we will see that these three concepts around quality would be interesting to reflect on when we'll be looking at solutions later on.
Okay. Well, I think we can begin to see why the data problems that I suffered many years ago are still persisting, because clearly the data supply chain, the structures, the databases that are involved today were very much the same yesteryear. So in this respect, it looks like we're chasing a bit of a mirage on data quality. There's always going to be a problem around gaining the data quality. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to pick up on what Chris alluded to in his remarks about data sharing, and about where perhaps there is a need for a single repository of data, maybe a cooperative, maybe a utility, maybe a SWIFT-like organization, where that data can be stored and managed, and everybody can go to that data source and rely on it as quality. So even if it's inaccurate, everyone's inaccurate. So in that respect, it would have an enormous beneficial impact. This may well be unrealistic, but I'm able to float an unrealistic solution. But that, and also it would require data sharing. So Chris, data sharing between competing organizations that have similar investors, similar clients, similar customers, Is this unrealistic for banks to data share with other banks?
I think we've got to look at this as far as not just between counterparties and intermediaries, but also sort of cross-border as well, and also the origination of the data as well, where there's market data that comes from that has the intellectual property owned by suppliers. That there are all myriads of areas where sharing of information isn't necessarily that straightforward. I mean, there are examples of central databases. So, for example, through MiFID, the FIRDS, the Financial Instrument Reference Data Service system that ESMA set up for MiFID, that is an example of a regulatory central system. So there are precedents for this. But actually through the CSDR Article 6, there's a requirement for SSI exchange on T, so that's actually coming through regulation. But no, information sharing between counterparties, in some locations there are privacy laws. There are potential. It's not necessarily that straightforward to achieve, and the other is with industry initiatives, getting them off the ground as well. I mean, in the sort of the blurb for this event, talking about the cost to the industry, what's difficult to find is crystallizing what that cost is and where it's hitting, and it's where that cost is attributed in order to fund such an initiative. So, as I said earlier, if you like, the status quo systems which are in place, the cost of changing those is significant. So the outcome needs to be very clear that it will move the dial in order to fly.
Benoit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the sharing or the access to data, because by and large, reference data is not about sensitive data. If you think about the financial terms of an asset, I mean, it's like public data. So of course, trade or transaction data are sensitive in essence, but I don't think the sensitivity of the data is necessarily the big problem when it comes to sharing the information. And likewise, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of technology. You have many different technologies around here, APIs, you name it, and these are, they are there to support any data management thing and distribution. So yes, I could see if we were to start from scratch, or if you were to make a move to something that is less duplicate all over the place, you will need to come to some form of mutual enterprise to get to a point where an entity perhaps master the data or make it available as a sort of a primary distributor for the industry. You could imagine that, but there are many different jurisdictions, and it's interesting to see that some of the reference data are now also being picked up by regulation, as Chris mentioned. And well, this being said, they will say, yeah, you have to have the LEI, for instance, and you see the LEI in MiFID II, CSDR, it's everywhere. But it's not necessarily to a point where they say you need to go left or right in how you implement the thing for the industry. So the reason I mention that is that a regulatory push is obvious for everyone to move, but it's not necessarily something that is the best fit for the market. The other angle we can look at is standardization. I think we mentioned earlier on the work done by ISO in around the data format and taxonomy. I think that's part of the answer as well. It's not something coming from the industry, but with the intent on improving the stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that the amount of effort that's been put in by the industry over such a long space of time, looking at standards and bringing standards in. And I think 10 years ago when the LEI project started to LEI, so there's clear recognition of what would help with the efficiency and the cost of data. Yet it's not a linked effort. It appears to be coming in from different initiatives, from different quarters, and it's up to the banks or the investing institutions to try and forge their own path to try and deal with their particular data problems. Even though, as we've already highlighted, that the data issues are international. They're not even in one place. They are worldwide, and the quality of the compilation of that data, let alone the distribution of the data, is of varying quality. So it does appear that the quality issue is an ongoing battle, that we won't really see the sort of utopia of 100% data quality at all. And if we do, if I understand you both correctly, if we do try to look for the 100% quality, it's more likely to come either through a regulatory push or through some international market standardization issue that brings all the data supply chains into a single target of quality. So not anytime soon, I would suggest. Would that summary be something you would recognise?
Yeah, not sure about the again, as I said earlier on, the word quality. I think the starting point for data is high quality, and all market participants have high quality standards, and I would stand away from any suggestion otherwise. However, they can have very different starting points. That information can have started off for a different purpose and be used for trade processing. I think the way forward is through incremental steps, and things like the alert database being more widely adopted, things like the legal entity identifier and the linking with the BIC that's been taking place, things like the ISO format 20022 Swift messages. What these do is they're very big industrial scale initiatives, huge initiatives across the industry. And what they do is they force the review of data at the ground level, and that therefore raises the bar of getting to understand where the difference is and why, and feeding back to where there are breaks. And frankly, that is how you get the data improvement. It's those incremental steps are far more likely to succeed than trying to go for a utopian sort of inverted comma silver bullet solution, which they're aiming for the sky. But the initiatives that have taken place that enable that data exchange and data comparison are certainly a very positive way forward.
Is that your summarizing your view of that, Benoit?
Yeah, I think we should not assume that we would be having, waving a magic wand to start from scratch all over again. I think, to me, part of the solution will come from having some degree of aggregation. So there is value in that. I mean, you don't necessarily want to go to each individual source to get your data. So there is definitely part of the solution will be about aggregation, I believe, as well. And indeed, you need to bring the different segments of the whole financial industry together to zoom on the topic. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to touch a little bit on technology as a potential provider of a solution, if not the total solution, at least part of a solution. And I'd like to ask around artificial intelligence and machine learning, if applied along with, say, a blockchain structure, where at least we have a audit trail of data, whether you think something like those technologies would have a beneficial impact on the quality of data, but also the managing and access of that data. Can I throw that to you, Benoit?
Yeah, I think the technology in itself is not necessarily relevant. It's the key question is, how does it change the business model? Now, with the fact that you would be, if you assume a DLT, not a centralized fashion, but a decentralized fashion, in where you would have somehow a single version of the truth being managed on that chain, and people would just be connecting to that could indeed make a lot of sense. It would make a lot of sense as long as the source is the one that is the master on the data that is being managed, and then gradually, you know, as the life cycle of a security, for instance, evolves, then more data gets added. But yeah, you could see that happening. You will still need to have somebody managing that whole protocol of a blockchain. But yeah, I mean, conceptually, I can see that. And you do see initiative on the industry where, like, data marketplace and the likes, where the idea is also, you know, less focus on connecting people to a single place to view or consume the data.
Okay, Chris. Technology, artificial intelligence.
Certainly. I think the use cases for that are really interesting in the market at the moment. I think the Australian exchange is doing a lot of work on DLT, and we're obviously very interested to see how that progresses. I mean, if we were to sort of break this down into what those technologies could do to move the dial, on the side of entity data, for example, there's been a lot of work in the last 10-15 years on utilities by way of bringing this type of information together. And so that's maybe one to look at as to how those have succeeded and how far they've got, and where there is a sort of utility answer for entity potentially. Similarly for SSIs, the alert, I think is what we're seeing as something which more firms could get behind, and there is a certain, in areas, some reticence, but large firms generally have got behind alerts, and you know, even within that area, the place of settlement is an example of where there are variabilities and variances between firms, so that place of settlement can mean different things to different firms, so there are inconsistencies. That's an example of what I was saying earlier, of where the starting point can be different, and it's a different view, and it's not a data quality issue, it's an interpretation issue. I think if you move to instrument, the underlying instrument information behind this, you're absolutely right, Benoit, by saying that it's a relatively few number of fields that are needed for trade. I think it's certainly, in our case, we'd say it's about 20 different instrument fields. It's a very skinny master for transaction processing, but nevertheless, that's a lot of information. How to put that on blockchain or other types of technology, and to make it relevant for the rest of the investment process, because it's not all about transaction processing and STP. There are many other things that this information is used for. So yeah, and corporate actions. I think my understanding of this is that sort of starting with new technologies to try and rebuild, certainly there's an appetite, and there's been a lot of work in the last 5 years looking at areas where this could be. But generally, I think what I've heard is that this is more in sort of discrete areas that have a limited number of participants, as opposed to worldwide millions and millions of parties. That's a much bigger ask. As I said earlier, incremental steps to solve the matter in hand for this subject matter about reference data. I'm not sure how we could reinvent those sort of key areas of reference data.
Right. Okay. Can I just move on to the cost issue? I mean, costs can be measured in a number of ways, can't they? They can be the costs of acquiring the data, the costs of managing the data, and then the costs of when the data goes wrong, you know, resulting in I know, regulatory fines or whatever, which occasionally we do see those hit the market. How is it best to measure the cost of data? Do we look at the cost of data as a combination of all those things, or do we look at the cost of data as something, well, you know, we're in the business, we've got to do it, so we'll just bear the cost, whatever that may be. And if we're not prepared to bear the cost, where do we change it? Where do we find cost reductions? Chris.
Right. Well, I think pretty good place to start is within security services, because anything that costs anything is really drilled down on. And so, for example, if there are any funding costs for failed trades, if there are any resources that are needed to clear STP shortfalls, if there are any regulatory fines, all these are the subject of enormous management oversight to root out, so that there's minimal inefficiency and certainly no avoidable inefficiency. So I think these are areas of cost which have a huge amount of attention already. The one area that is challenging is buying market data, hence my role, market data, because the cost of bringing instrument data, corporate actions, and not relevant to this discussion, but asset pricing and risk information. The cost is vast for the industry. But there's good reason for that, and there's good reason why we continue to buy that data from suppliers. They do it very well. But I think to come back to the matter in hand for this discussion, the cost of those breaks, the cost of reference data, I think this is very much in the market already, that any cost that's avoidable is already got a great deal of attention. I'm not seeing this this sort of overlay of cost. I think there'd be a lot more attention on this if there were that level of cost.
Benoit.
It's interesting. I mean, the securities business over the past decades, I guess, has emerged as the one managing the back office of a different business line. So I guess it would make sense to start from that angle, because these securities businesses are huge consumer of data. So yes, I totally can see that. And apart from all that we've already discussed, I think the cost is everything around the usage, in the sense that the data provider will see the data as an asset. It will claim that it has an intellectual property on it, and therefore it will licensing you a given usage. And if you want to use that for, I don't know, another legal entity within your group, then you add an extra premium. Or if your usage is for trade processing, it's one usage, but if you want to use for something else, it's another one. So I think there's a lot going on with how you manage usage rights. We do see, and definitely I guess on the securities business side, more and more data are being acquired at enterprise level as well. So I guess it's a matter of scale and how to try to manage the cost by having that scale, and also avoiding any issues by not complying with whatever data licensing agreement you have with the data provider. So yes, and then of course what we've seen over the past 5-6 years definitely is the rise of a series of new roles within the organization, and they became more formalized, from the chief data officers to data steward, data custodians, and also a lot of different methodologies that you try to, and everything is about risk and quality. Of course, it comes at a cost, and I guess it's a balancing act, but it's true that the focus on data that is definitely here today, well, maybe not 20 years ago, or maybe less, will mean that the costs are going to be better managed by companies as well.
Okay. I'm going to, it's an interesting question for me. I'm hoping it is for the audience as well. We are seeing that firms are looking to have their workers working from home, certainly in the near future, and maybe forever. I mean, there's already been many announcements of large firms saying that they don't intend to have people back in the offices at all. Now, what dangers does that provide for data in terms of data protection and data privacy? Having a remote workforce, does that mean that the risks of privacy and protection are increased, or can we rely still on the a solid 4 walls around the data in the vault, and that data will be securely protected whether people are working at home or not. Chris.
Yeah, well, certainly in my case, I can vouch for that. The security controls around our systems access are very, very robust. I think the data vendors have been very inventive in making sure that we have sort of internet access where needed to reference data during the working from home BCP, or maybe, as you say, Gary, maybe more of the new normal. The working from home, partially working from home, has been normal within HSBC for some time. So what's happened is when we went to full work from home, certainly in the UK in March, the technology was there. We had the Zoom, we have messaging, and we've got the secure networks. So certainly, we've also got rules and regulations, for us as to what we can print out and what we can and what we can take out of our workplace, for example. So there are lots of guidelines around this, and I've certainly not felt in the last 8 months that there's any concern with any leakage of information caused by working from home, and I've certainly not heard of any.
Okay, Benoit?
I think it's the same thing. I mean, I work for a financial market infrastructure, so I'm already happy that I can use Zoom, because it hasn't been blocked by some cyber security expert somewhere. So no, I mean, the way we access information from our company is super secured, and I don't see any risk. I mean, I can't take anything out of the system, put it that way. So no, it's like working at the office, but from home. But in terms of access management or data leakage issues, I don't think it's a concern. But again, I mean, both for HSBC or Euroclear, we live with that sort of a risk management principles. It might be different with some players perhaps, but not in large institution. I don't think it's going to be the case.
To the extent that sorry, Gary, I was just going to say to underline that, I can't even print. Working from home, I cannot print anything. So I'm having to learn new tricks as to how to retain information without the physical paper, like a few people of my generation. So no, it really is secure.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Sorry, Gary.
I was just going to touch on ESG for a bit. I mean, we've already done a webinar on ESG with Bloomberg a few months back, but ESG obviously is a burgeoning issue for the industry, for investors, and in fact, society as a whole, I would say. Now, in terms of data governance, how do you feel the industry is fixed in terms of complying with ESG, in terms of governance of data? Benoit?
So ESG has been around for a while, and I think the danger today of what everybody's afraid is greenwashing, and so it's not a surprise that you see some regulator like the European, in the EU coming up with things around mandatory disclosure of ESG reports, but also things like real taxonomy to make sure that whatever matrix you're using, you can these are based on real data, and you're not tapping too much the data, so to speak. So I think that's going to be the challenge in the years to come. If ESG wants to stay relevant going forward, you will need to make sure that it comes to some form of standardization around taxonomy, and I do believe that having a regulation clarifying what it meant by ESG is useful for that perspective. But that's interesting also, because you do see again, it's organic. Everything we do, it's organic, and then the answer to look at the issue of that growth basically come at a later stage. So, and here on ESG, at least on this side of the pond, I do see that the regulator is saying, look guys, it's very nice, but what are you doing with these ESG metrics? What do they mean? And so they say, now we are going to clarify for you how you should compute these different scoring.
Yeah, I think ESG is, yeah, thanks, Gary. I think ESG is a long way behind the world of financial data that we're used to. And I've been knee deep in ESG for the last 3 years, doing all sorts of sample test analysis. And as per what Benoit was saying, I think really I would characterize ESG data as being very much research information used for investment purposes that is assimilated by fund managers to help make investment decisions and to integrate ESG. And whereas the sort of sustainable impact investment is still very much still emerging. I think to cut a very long story short, we launched a product quite recently on ESG reporting, and because of those variances, we offered a choice of 3 providers, and we know they're all very different from each other, and they're different for very good reasons, because ESG, you can't measure the world's problems in a data point. There's always going to be something below the surface. So there's sort of differing views about companies that are higher or lower performance. It's not like a credit rating at all. The correlation is just not there in that way. But as Benoit says, the EU taxonomy and other countries are launching taxonomies. As we get more company disclosed reported information, the better position we're in to have what we would see as data. The other thing about security and sensitivity of ESG is that actually, particularly this year following COVID, some ESG information can actually be quite market sensitive. So we do have to be quite careful about what ESG information about poorly performing or high performing gets shared. And apart from the intellectual property aspects, there's also a market sensitivity aspect to it. But it is completely intriguing, and it needs another session.
Yeah, because you're right. It's all about how a company is managing some of the risks and mitigates them, or basically how are they exposed to some of these ESG, underlying data, or more to the point, reality. Yeah? And so whether it's global warming and the like, so that's indeed very sensitive for a company.
Well, ISITC Europe has taken ESG as our overarching topic, because we don't expect that things will move off the agenda anytime soon. It's an ongoing target, and I think there's so many nuances in ESG. In fact, the environmental, the social, and the governance issues are so nuanced and so multi-layered, and it can be a really complex thing. There's a lack of transparency at the moment, and I think definitions even of what these things are. And it's a bit worrying that the ratings agencies may be using ESG already without necessarily having people understanding, the investors understanding what actually constitutes. How do you measure it? I'm not sure what the measurement is for an ESG. Anyway, that's a story for another day.
Sorry, Gary. If I could just have 30 seconds on that. The credit ratings agencies that we've spoken to are looking at this very, very scientifically as to the credit rating itself, and how there may be risk associated with the credit rating caused by ESG, and also a number of them have been buying ESG companies and then integrating them. So no, I would say that the credit rating concept is clear, and the ESG aspects of that is being, well, certainly from what we've seen, has been done very thoroughly.
Right, okay. We'll get you on our next ESG webinar, I think, Chris, and we can go into that with far more detail. We have got some questions that have come in. One relates to a part of our discussion earlier, and it's around a utility. And it's a quick question, really. What's the chances of a not-for-profit making utility being created to deal with the quality of data issues? So we give it a 1 to 10, 10 being yes, it's very likely to happen, 1 being not in our lifetime. Benoit.
So 10 is not in a lifetime, you mean?
1 not in our lifetime, 10 yes, it's likely to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd probably say a 6 or a 7, because I don't see that as an immediate next step, I would say. And I believe it's going to be a matter of scale. So how quickly can you get to a point where scale comes at play? Because as the question clearly says, I mean, you know, how do you make it work from a financial point of view? Yeah.
Yeah. Chris?
I think there's a lot of appetite for utilities. there's a lot of concern about the scale of, as we've been discussing for the last 40 minutes, the scale is massive, and so the appetite for utilities for these areas is high. As to the probability, I mean, what I've seen of utilities is that the ones that have started off so far in recent years have been commercially oriented, and so therefore, in order to get the payback, in order to get it over the line, it requires an element of sophistication. And the trouble is, once you put in that sophistication to make it cost effective, it makes it much harder to cross-sell to others because it's got bespoke areas in it. So it's kind of probably the only way it could really work is if it was not for profit, and if it used those building blocks. But obviously, how to get that funded and how to get that integrated, and even though it may be not for profit, the cost of integrating that across financial services would still be very large. But I think there is appetite to do it.
So where would you go? Between 1 and 10?
In probability. I'm glass half full during this session, so I'm going to go for 7.
Oh, right, okay.
Not saying when.
That's amazingly.
I'm not saying when.
Yeah, no. It's that's amazingly positive. I was anticipating both of you coming down with a 1 or a 2. So thank you for that.
Although to put in context, I'm not talking about the utopia that we were discussing earlier. I'm talking about areas and components that would contribute towards it.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, Chris, and but nonetheless, that's a very positive view from both of you. Thank you for that. The question about the question is what are the top 3 things that you would suggest to the industry to improve the quality of reference data? That is across the industry. So the buy side and the sell side. I think we can throw in issuers maybe into that pot as well as issuers of data. So what would be your suggestion, Benoit?
Well, it's I guess one of the first thing to do is to clarify the ownership. I mean, in terms of a given company trying to harness that, I think you need to have a clear ownership and that really going drill down to the lower data attribute level. So ownership of who owns the data and who is responsible for what. The other thing that I see quite relevant is to understand how the data you are looking at is actually created, or how does it come from, just to understand what is it you're going to be consuming. So these are two things. And then I think the third one is probably more about how do you avoid duplication within a given company. I think that's where the whole reflection has to be done at the group level to see what makes sense to keep separate and what makes sense to aggregate in one single place. I think these are probably the first thing. And obviously with the ownership, what you start by doing is building an inventory. And so it's really back to basics about, try to have that good starting point and then make decision for your company about that.
Okay, Chris?
Okay, I'll have a go at this. I think on the entity side, I would go for mapping into the legal entity identifier as a way of improving compatibility and speaking the same language, if you like. On the SSI side, I'd go for alert adoption. And on the instrument, I think it's challenges. So where the ISO messages come through and there's gaps in the data, then use the MI. And we have it coming out of our ears because it's the main part of our business efficiency. But where there are gaps and breaks, to use that MI and to challenge and get on the phone and go out to parties where there are repeat offenders and chase down where those differences are. And it's not going to be a quick thing, but by building those into BAU, that's how you get step changes over time.
Right. Okay. What do you think is the driver for change? We mentioned MiFID earlier, and we mentioned the regulators on a number of occasions. Should the drivers of change be from a legal or a regulatory standpoint, or should it be driven by business considerations? Chris?
Gosh, another very good question. I think it's got to be those who feel the pain. So whoever, there's quite a big opening section that's caused the generated this event. So wherever that pain is felt, and as I said in my comments, I didn't actually grasp, and obviously I grasped the issues behind this, but actually where that pain is felt is really where the responsibility comes from. And obviously the regulators have got very, very clear views. I mean, I'll just give one anecdote about the regulators' view of reference data. And this goes back actually about 5 years when I was doing some detailed work on Solvency II, the regulation. And I met with some of the regulators at the time, and they were astounded that we buy in reference data for instruments. They thought that we actually got the prospectuses and checked back each instrument to the prospectus point by point before using it. And so when I explained this as like an industrial scale buying in information from third parties, they were quite surprised. So I think the regulators coming up the curve as to how the industry works and why is important. But certainly what I've seen of regulation, it's been very well focused on specific regulatory outcomes. I wouldn't see them necessarily focusing on reference data quality specifically, other than for when it's causing a problem. So I think it's all about where the root cause of the problem is being felt.
Yeah. Benoit.
Yeah, I think that's definitely that. I think if you look at the LEI, it came after the crisis where basically the idea was to say we're not able to manage counterparty risk correctly, or because we can't evaluate the risk accurately because we don't know the companies basically. So yeah, it always starts from an issue that you want to solve. I don't believe that I've seen much around reference data from the regulator today, or it's very limited to a specific data like the LEI we've mentioned. So no, I'm not necessarily expecting anything more than that at this stage. But obviously, each of these little regulation that comes up with a given reference data point does help because it brings clarity, and so that's the benefit of the industry at the end of the day.
A question about responsibility of the issuers of data. Now, the issuers of data, I'm in this case, anyone that issues data into the marketplace. So that can be the corporate, or it could be an investor or someone from an investing institution. So anyone that creates that data, should they have a template? So an industry template that everyone has to complete to make sure that data is it's fulsome, it's covered all the boxes, even if what it's covered may be an error, but at least it would standardize from an industry standpoint. And if we did go down a template route, an industry template route that everyone buys into, should that be regulatory enforced by the issuer to make sure that any errors of data issuance find its way back to the where it's at fault? Chris.
I thought that's how instrument creation did work. I thought the issuers did publish instrument data out. I think the what happens then is that there's a process to add additional fields, and different providers have got different ways of doing that. So I think the starting point is identical, but you kind of need to go down into those, as I said earlier, 20 data points as to how they're formed and what they're called and how they're constructed. But there are sort of there are some variances in the way that is put together. But I think the starting point is the same. Whether that needs to go further, that's an interesting question as to, I mean, what starts off in life as a relatively few set of data points becomes probably 200 or 300, depending on the provider and depending on what that information is used for. But certainly that could be the subject of analysis.
Yeah. Benoit.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, if I look at Euroclear as a market infrastructure, the way about securities reference data, for instance, the way issuers deal with us, so we support their primary issuance, and as part of this process, they feed us with the key critical data to identify a security before it is actually issued. So we do have this sort of a digitalized fashion of communication to harness these, so to speak, 20 data attributes, and then of course, we do manage more than just 20 data attributes, and there is still some manual work going on. And because if on closing day, typically we would get the final documentation, and we would have teams of people working to go across the prospectus, or even giving a call to the issuer agent when needed to clarify things. And this is how we then create the digital data out of a prospectus. So I'm aware that in the past there has been some ideas about having a template or some taxonomy to directly, I would say, scan at the issuer side the relevant data. We've seen that in corporate action, for instance, in the US. So yes, part of it is already standardized or digitalized, but not everything can be standardized, and that's the trick, of course. Is usually what is plain vanilla can be standardized. For the rest, I mean, I'm sure everyone will still be very creative in the coming years in our industry. So it's like an endless battle, that one. But yes, so you do already have part of that in the digitalized format already.
Okay, lovely. We're moving towards the close of our session, so I just want to throw in some quick answers to these questions. Chris, has home working increased fraud risk?
I've not seen anything to suggest that.
Okay. Benoit, have you?
Well, there's not much people coming around my desk when I work here, so no, I don't, because that would be the only case, I think. No, I don't think it is. But again, it's because in our reality, the everything we get connected to the office is super secured from the start. So no, I don't think so. It's a material. Okay. There's always a risk, what I say, but it's not exponential because of the fact that we're working from home.
Okay.
It's unbelievably tightly regulated.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Say again. I spoke over you. Say again.
I said it's unbelievably it's unbelievably tightly regulated, the whole area of data privacy and what we can and can't do. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Data quality versus data vehicles, are they complementary or enemies?
Well, I think if I understand the question right, data vehicles enable data quality if they're used properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I would imagine that the question relates to the carrying of the data, but I would have thought that in the data world, quality is a #1 priority. From there, everything can or not be run efficiently. So data quality, I would say, is complementary. Data vehicles as enemies, I don't see it.
No, I don't see that.
No, I don't get it. Right, last question. The role of technologies, we've touched on this in our session, but the role of technologies in relieving the data quality issues. I think we spoke about this during the session, that although technology, I think, has an important role to play in improving data, as do standards, as do cooperation between the supply chain and the industry. It's a collaboration, I think, of all these. I think we covered this during our session. So I'm going to answer that question for you and say, yes, it is important and it will have a part to play, but it's not the whole answer. Right. Thank you, Chris and Benoit. I'm just going to, we've got a minute, so I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds just to finish the debate and just give leave the audience with a couple of views. Can I ask for you, Chris, first, just a couple of points to finish with?
Yeah, I think pass on to those on. I'm a member of the CISI, so that those of you who've done the hour, you've earned your CPD points. So thank you very much for joining us. And the sort of practical things I mentioned, if you don't particularly work in transaction processing, but you know people who do, then do pass on the messages. It's about finding the data quality issues, using technology to find the issues, and then going down to the root cause of it and chasing up and getting them fixed. It's not going to be a technology that, as Gary just said, that answers it. It's going to be people following up and using good practice to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Benoit.
Well, on our side, what we keep on doing is try to mitigate risk and cost for the industry. So at Euroclear, we will be further looking at also finding solution in terms of reference data and the data that we already aggregate on our side. I think we do have ways to make them available to whomever is interested. So that, I would say, all part of the answer to this industry problem is you know, the baby step we can take today. Yeah.
Thank you, Benoit. Thank you, Chris and Benoit, for being absolutely brilliant today. Your responses and answers and the debate, I think we covered so much ground. I think you were absolutely tremendous. You live up to your world-class billing in the data industry. So thank you ever so much for your efforts today. And especially Benoit. For those of you who don't know, Benoit, this is his first day of his holiday, and a true professional. He's been in front of a screen answering questions all afternoon. So thank you very much.
It was a pleasure, Gary. Thank you.
And
likewise.
Yeah, finally, thank you to the CISI again for working with us on this event. We're extremely grateful and to the CISI. ISITC Europe will be posting this film onto our website for our members sometime soon, and the CISI, this will go into the CISI library. I think it's left for me to do is to thank you all once again for tuning in, and look out for the next ISITC Europe CISI webinar. There's one coming your way very soon, and you will see it in the press, LinkedIn, social media, and through all the usual channels. So thank you once again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye bye now.